Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, I'm excited to welcome you to our first Open Mind program of 2022. I cannot think of a better way to begin the season than by welcoming back Dr. Wendy Suzuki, world-renowned professor of neuroscience and psychology at NYU, and author of 3 critically acclaimed books, Anxiety is Your Superpower, Happy Brain, Happy Life, that she spoke about at a previous in-person Open Mind program in 2019, and her latest book, Good Anxiety, Harnessing the Power of the Most Misunderstood Emotion. Dr. Suzuki will be joined in conversation by Dr. Catherine Mogul, Associate Clinical Professor and Co-Director of the Department of Mental Health and UCLA Prevention Center of Excellence, and Clinical Director of the UCLA Family Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Program. We are honored to have these 2 distinguished scholars, Dr. Suzuki and Dr. Mogul, with us today to share their knowledge and expertise about anxiety, an emotion that many of us have experienced frequently in the last several years as we navigate the pandemic, climate change, social unrest, and the tumultuous political climate of the world and our country, especially today as we recall the events of January 6th, 2021. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping guidelines. Our program today will run for 1 hour, with the last 15 minutes reserved for your questions. We ask that you please type your questions into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Today's program is being taped and will be available for viewing tomorrow on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. There you will also find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, a calendar of upcoming events, information about our Friends Scholar program, and about our exciting Open Mind Film Festival for high school students that will be held on April 28th, 2022. For those of you with us today for the first time, our program is part of our free community lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders in science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. And now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Wendy Suzuki, who will be joined later by Dr. Mogul. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vicki. It's such a pleasure to be here, to be able to talk to all of you today about my latest book, Good Anxiety, Harnessing the Power of the Most Misunderstood Emotion. Let me start with the beginning. Why did I want to tackle anxiety? Let me emphasize that I wrote this book, the first draft of this book, even before the pandemic. And I did that because I saw the rise of anxiety in my students at NYU. And then when I thought, gosh, there's a lot more anxiety, I realized it wasn't just in the students. It was in my faculty colleagues. It was in myself. It was in my friends. This was well before the pandemic, but those anxiety levels were already going up. And of course, they've only skyrocketed even more after the start of the pandemic. So that's why I wanted to focus on anxiety. Now let me address the question, why do I call it good anxiety? What is good about anxiety? I'm sure many of you are already asking yourselves. I say that anxiety is good because evolutionarily, anxiety and that underlying physiological stress response evolved to protect us from the dangers in this world. It actually was critical and continues to be critical for our survival. And remember, 2.5 million years ago, most of those threats were literal physical threats to our body, lions and tigers and bears. So that stress response, when a twig cracked, could save literally our lives by either running away or fighting, that classic fight or flight response that we all know about. The problem is that we have the equivalent of little twigs cracking all around us all of the time, inspiring and starting our anxiety from the 24/7 news feed to social media to all of the to global warming. And so we are in a state of heightened anxiety. What do we need to do? And the first thing I always like to address is, what do we do about this feeling? I need help right now. What can we do to decrease that anxiety? So here is take-home lesson number 1, which is, we already talked about that fight or flight response. It is the stress response. It's also called the sympathetic nervous system response. You have a whole, and all of us have a whole part of our nervous system devoted to getting us out of danger, either fighting or running away. But did you know there's an equal and opposite part of every single one of us, it's our nervous system, whose job is to de-stress our nervous system, to help us rest and digest. That is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And what does that do? Well, it slows our heart rate, it slows our respiration, and it shunts blood from our muscles, where the sympathetic, the fight or flight system, shunted all our blood so that we can run away or fight, and it shunts the blood from the muscles towards our digestion and reproductive organs. So all of you, I want everybody to walk away with this knowledge. Every one of us is a de-stressing part of our nervous system. And the next question is, okay, how do I activate it? And here is the best, most effective way to activate it. Many ways to do it, but my favorite is deep breathing. Think about it. Thousands of years, monks have known that deep breathing is a wonderful way to get into that restful, calm, meditative state. And what you're doing is you're stimulating part of that nervous system that is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, and getting us, activating that nervous system to calm us down. So let's get into the weeds here. Here's the specific kind of breathing that I recommend that is going to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. And I invite you all to try it here with me right now. It's called 4-part boxed breathing. 4-part box breathing. All we're going to do is inhale on a slow 4 count, hold at the top for 4 counts, exhale on a 4 count, and hold it at the bottom for 4 counts. It's like a box, okay? And so close your eyes and just listen to my voice. Everybody take a big inhale, 3, 2, 1, hold at the top, 3, 2, 1, big exhale, 3, 2, 1, hold at the bottom, 3, 2, 1. Stay there for just a moment. That was just 1 round. I always know it works because even just leading it, I can't breathe and talk at the same time, but even just leading that always calms me down. And so what is this going to do for you? It is something that you can practice before an anxiety-provoking event, because all of us know what those many of the anxiety-provoking events in our lives are. I love it because you can do it in the middle of an anxiety-provoking conversation, and the anxiety-provoking person on the other side doesn't even know you're doing it. Great for kids. You can teach it, practice it with your kids, and have them practice it when they're feeling more anxious in school, for example. Very, very powerful. So what I wanted to do in this book, Good Anxiety, is not just describe and kind of promote. I'm the major promoter these days for the parasympathetic nervous system. I want everybody to know what it is, that it is there, that you need to find ways to activate it for yourself in addition to this deep breathing. But I wanted to give people lots and lots of tools to be able to turn the volume down on their anxiety, because that is the first step. So actually, before I get to that, I forgot to mention that this book, Good Anxiety, is not the go-to treatment for clinical levels of anxiety. That is the debilitating levels of anxiety that make it impossible to live your life normally. You can't work at your job, it affects your social interactions. This book was really written for the rest of us that have lower levels of anxiety. I call it everyday anxiety. It still could be disruptive, but not debilitating. When you get up to clinical, that's a very different beast. And I'm sure we can talk about it more with Dr. Catherine Mogul when she gets on when she comes on a little bit later. So this is for everyday annoying anxiety, that anxiety that feels like a big weight that you're holding around your neck. What are the tools that we can do to address that? Tool number one, deep breathing. Tool number two, just because I'm so passionate about it, I've studied it in my lab for so long, is moving your body. Every single time you move your body, and I'm talking about going for a walk, walking around your dining room table, going up and down the stairs just once, that is going to start to release a whole bunch of neurochemicals in your brain. I call it a neurochemical bubble bath that you give your brain every time you move your body. And what that is doing for your anxiety levels is that is upping neurochemicals, including serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine, and endorphins. Those neurochemicals together decrease anxiety levels. They also decrease hostility and depression levels as well. So that's another very powerful tool. So the tool, if you are concerned about your anxiety, lots of tools. The third part of the book is called Learning How to Worry Well, and it's full of different kinds of tools. I've just kind of gotten you to the tip of the iceberg. Because when you are dealing with everyday anxiety, like basically everybody is, the first goal is to turn that anxiety level down so that you can use the anxiety to help respond to those big, more serious threats. And the other very important thing that anxiety, that turning down the volume of anxiety does, is it allows you to lean in more to those uncomfortable emotions. The promise, I'm sorry to say that the promise of good anxiety is not, I'm going to get rid of your anxiety. The promise of good anxiety is I'm going to teach you how to use anxiety strategically to your benefit. So here's the thing, we are complex humans, and we have not only those happy, wonderful emotions that we all love to revel in, joy and happiness and contentment, but we also have a whole range of more uncomfortable emotions: anxiety, sadness, fear, anger. And those are there for a reason. They're healthy. They're part of our normal everyday emotional makeup. So that is why anxiety is not going away. But in turning down the volume of anxiety, using all the tools, you're able to use anxiety for what it was meant to give you a little warning. Pay attention here. What is going on here? What does that fear mean? What can you do to address that fear? It becomes a warning, honing system for you instead of the thing that you are just dreading and kind of stops you in your tracks. So that is one of the elements that I talk about, the power of human emotions and the importance of the uncomfortable emotions in this kind of kaleidoscope of emotions that we have. But in my last little moment before we bring Catherine on, I wanted to spend the rest of the time to talk about what I feel is really the secret sauce of good anxiety, which is, again, what happens when you learn how to turn the volume down on your anxiety. And what I experienced, what I researched, what I found is that anxiety, when used in its most strategic form, gives us a set of powerful gifts or superpowers. Yes, you heard me right. Gifts or superpowers coming from your and my particular form of anxiety. So let me unpack that. There are 6 forms of gifts or superpowers. I'm not going to go through all 6 because I want you to be able to kind of discover them on your own in the book, but I want to give you 2. The first one is the gift of productivity. Now, how does my anxiety lead to a gift of productivity? Let me explain exactly why. A very, very common form of anxiety that I certainly experience is that what if list. I'm about to go to sleep and sleep is going to come. It's going to feel so good. And bing, suddenly, oh God, what if did I do that? What if I didn't do it well enough? What if I didn't do it early enough? What if I need to do something else? And all of these what ifs come into my head right before I'm going to go to sleep, and I can't go to sleep. And so that is a very common form of anxiety, of everyday anxiety. Many of us have experienced that. And so the trick is, and the kind of jujitsu karate move that you can do on that very common form of anxiety, is to turn that what if list into a to-do list. And for me, it absolutely does allow me to go to sleep more quickly when I realize, okay, note those down. Those are things to pay attention to, but I'm going to address each and every one of them tomorrow. Why? Because your anxieties are coming up most of the time, not all the time, for things that are legitimately a concern in your life. This is what is of concerning to you. So can you turn those worries into actions the next day? And that has made me both sleep better and more productive the next day. I'll tell you the secret. I can't take credit for that particular gift or superpower. I was at a party describing the premise of the book before we had finished the whole thing. And I was talking to a lawyer, and I said the book was called Good Anxiety. We're talking about the good aspects of anxiety. And she said, oh, I am the high paid lawyer that I am today because of my anxiety. And she described that gift that I just gave to you. And it turns out, if you interview CEOs and heads of companies all over the country, these are some of the tools that they're already using. That is harnessing their own anxiety, their own worry, their own almost unconscious brain working about what might happen, and turning that into a productive way to address possible outcomes, possible opportunities. All depends on what your business and what your concerns are. That is gift number one, that again comes from your specific form of what if anxiety. Gift number two is one of my favorites. And gift number two is the gift of empathy. And this comes from my examining my own oldest form of anxiety. And many of my own anxieties are laid out to bear in this book. But my most common, oldest form of anxiety is actually social anxiety. And of course, I'm a teacher now and a speaker, so I've gained skills. I don't have fear of public speaking. I've always had a fear of social, like party social situations, making friends, those kinds of things. I was a very shy, awkward young girl and teenager, and even college and high school and college student. And I remember suffering for many years in the classroom where I really wanted to interact. That's not exactly social, but it absolutely manifested in the classroom. I wanted to ask that question, but I was too scared to do that. Social anxiety of speaking out in front of a classroom. Well, I realized that has come back to serve me and has become one of my biggest powers of empathy in my own classroom, because I'm at the front of the classroom now. And I instinctually know that there's so many students out there that were just like me. And so I instinctually, even before I realized I was doing it, I would always come early, stay late, make sure that anybody who wanted to talk to me, even if they didn't want to ask that question in class, had an opportunity to do that. Because I know that it's scary. It's scary enough just to talk to the teacher, but to talk to the teacher in front of the classroom. It really gave me this superpower of empathy. And so how will it work for you? Well, choose your most common, most long-standing form of anxiety. You know what it feels like. You know what it looks like. Just turn that knowledge out to the outside world and give somebody else a hand when you know that they're experiencing that same kind of anxiety. And the bonus is that we know that acts of compassion, acts of empathy release dopamine in your brain. So I like to say, come for the empathy, stay for the dopamine. So that is another one of the superpowers or gifts that comes from anxiety. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of an overview of how I approach anxiety, a little bit of the science behind it. And I'd like to describe as much as I can the neuroscience behind some of these tools to decrease anxiety levels. Some of them, like meditation and the breath work and the exercise, have a lot of science behind them. Some of them just work. I talk about laughter. There are a few studies about the effects of laughter specifically on anxiety, but it is a very powerful way to change your mood and kind of dispel those feelings of anxiety. So hopefully something for everybody. So at this time, I would love to invite our co-speaker here today, Dr. Catherine Mogul, to join me in conversation.
Hi, Dr. Suzuki. Thank you so much for sharing all about your book with us. It's sort of become my little guide to 1,000 strategies that I can actually use with some of the people I serve, my colleagues, my friends, my parents, my siblings. So thank you for writing such a practical book that I think is so helpful to so many of us. Part of the reason it's helpful for so many of us is, as you mentioned in the book and talked about at the top of this, there's a lot of us in America right now that have anxiety. In fact, I think you cite a study that shows 28% of us will meet the criteria for some anxiety disorder. Doesn't mean we all have one right now.
Right.
What's going on that's causing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the studies have linked it to these outside factors. The pandemic has absolutely contributed to it. I didn't give my simple definition of anxiety is that feeling of fear or worry that comes with uncertain situations. I can't think of another moment in my lifetime that is more uncertain than the last 2 years. What is the next variant? Is my shot going to be enough? Do I need a third? Do I need a fourth? So much uncertainty. And earlier, where am I going to can I get my groceries delivered in Manhattan anymore? I don't know. I mean, some basic, really fearful situations. And that's not even addressing all the extra concerns that people with children had and keeping them safe. So there is enormous amounts of uncertainty, more uncertainty these days than there was even just the few months before the pandemic. And that is contributing to everybody's just heightened state of anxiety.
You talk about, you have a big focus on emotions, and you talk about really intense emotions like fear and stress and anxiety, of course. And one of the things that I found really helpful was the way you describe the differences between fear and anxiety, or stress and anxiety. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I think the easiest kind of definition to focus on is the difference between the fear that comes from a threat that is an immediate threat. I'm in Manhattan, a taxi cab is, barreling towards us. Actually, that's not the best example. A bike, one of those e-bikes, are barreling towards us. That's one of my biggest dangers walking the streets of Manhattan. And that will activate, if I see that e-bike coming towards me, that is going to activate my stress system, that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. Anxiety is the worry that I have right now, right here, that tomorrow when I go out on the street, that I will face that situation. And unfortunately, our bodies are really good at imagining that situation and can respond similarly to it. So one is the immediate kind of physical threat, and the other is just the thought, the imagination of it that can bring up that same stress response. If you if you let it, if you don't use techniques to kind of quell those worries.
And how is that related to cortisol? Because you talk a lot about sort of all the neurochemicals that,
Right.
The science behind all of this.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I didn't mention cortisol when I was going through the that fight or flight response. The cortisol is kind of comes up a little bit more slowly. There are the responses of that sympathetic nervous system, which increases your heart rate, increases your respiration rate, and then shunts your blood to from your digestion and reproductive organs to your muscles. As that happens, there is a slightly longer kind of series of complex interactions that happen that result in increasing levels of cortisol being released by your adrenal glands just right above your kidneys, that then course all over your body. It affects your metabolism, it goes into your brain, and a little bit of cortisol can be great. That, you know, when you just get that jolt of fear at some time, your focus, your attention is better. You're able to make decisions very quickly. What is negative in the long term is if you deploy your stress system and deploy your cortisol long term, high levels of long term cortisol, you lose that ability to make yourself more focused, and you start to damage the same metabolic systems that are increased. You know, it actually really makes a lot of sense. You are stressing your fight or flight system that is increasing your heart rate, increasing your respiration, and actually shunting blood away from your digestion. What happens? You end up with chronic increases in heart rate that can lead to heart disease. You and from the digestion system, you end up with, if blood is shunting away from that all the time, you end up with digestive issues like ulcers. High levels of cortisol in the brain, my specialty, will attack two brain areas that are so critical for our longevity: the hippocampus, critical for long-term memory, and the prefrontal cortex. So again, both of these areas can benefit from a little burst of cortisol, just that quick, you know, I need to get out of here for a moment. But this is why this book is so important now. All of us that are suffering from anxiety have higher levels of cortisol. And so you want to get that down, because long-term higher levels of cortisol will start to damage these brain areas in the long term that we see in syndromes like PTSD.
And so is it also a factor for things like Alzheimer's disease or other dementias?
Yes, absolutely. So higher levels of stress, or in fact, trauma that starts very early in life, has been correlated with higher levels of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, because the cortisol that is higher in these stress-inducing situations will tend to first damage cells in the hippocampus and then kill them. And so that is that just helps the cascade of damage that ultimately results in dementia, and the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's.
But there's some good hormones that you talk about too. You talk about some neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine. And
Yes.
as you were talking about laughter, I was thinking about laughter and dopamine.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So basically anything that you can imagine that feels good is often associated with increasing levels of dopamine. Dopamine is our reward hormone. It is a neurotransmitter, not hormone. It is the neurotransmitter that gets released if you win the lottery, if you eat chocolate when you haven't had chocolate, when you have sex. High dopamine and serotonin. And so a lot of the anti-anxiety tools in my How to Worry Well toolbox are activities that have been known to increase serotonin and or dopamine levels. And I'm just going to share one of my favorite ones, and I admit nobody has done a study on this, but it was inspired by a book that I saw in a bookshop. I was writing this as I was writing Good Anxiety, and it was a book of positive self tweets that Lin-Manuel Miranda has sent to himself every day. Apparently, he is a positive self-tweeter. And so he'll send these tweets to himself, you can rhyme really well today. And, I don't know him, but I've seen him interviewed many times. You can just see he has that positive personality. So, one of the activities is, tweet like Miranda. What would you tweet to yourself if you were Lin-Manuel Miranda and giving yourself a positive self-tweet? Fun to do with the family. It's just laughter, as you were saying. That is something that made me laugh. I thought it would make everybody else laugh. And I think Twitter also needs more positive direction as well. So it serves many different purposes.
I heard someone say recently, imagine if we talked to ourselves the way we talk to our dogs and our pets.
Yeah.
How happy we would be if we looked in the mirror and said, aren't you so cute?
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's a really good exercise to try that. Maybe not out loud, but to yourself.
In the book, you really thoughtfully lay out the mechanisms that build anxiety and transform it, pathways for transforming it. And you link those pathways to resilience, which is a big area of interest for me because I focus on family resilience.
Right.
But I really like how you link the resilience literature with the anxiety research. And to me, it's so powerful thinking about why resilience is so powerful and why is it such a tool to harness good anxiety.
Yeah. So I think it's such a tool because you can use both the failures and the successes in your life to build your resilience. And I think that people have this idea, or at least I sometimes do, that I'm not Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and so I'm not going to have that kind of resilience. That's not the point. You don't have to be a Wonder Woman or a Superman to do that. In fact, sometimes your biggest failures can lead to your biggest boosts of resilience. And in fact, one of the really the origin story of the reason why this book turned out the way it did, and the reason why I honed in on these gifts or superpowers, was in that chapter on resilience. And it was because of a very, very difficult situation that I went through during the writing of this book. I lost both my father and my younger brother within 3 months of each other, both of unexpected heart attacks. My father was 85, so we had kind of expected that, but my brother was 50 years old. And it was the most tragic thing that I had ever gone through in my life. And I had to put this book down. I couldn't think about anxiety while I was grieving. But I realized that so I used all the tools, and I probably came up with many of the tools as I was healing myself from grief. Grief is not the same thing as anxiety, but that doesn't mean it didn't really affect this book. So I'm healing, I'm meditating, I'm exercising, I'm reaching out to friends, and so grateful for all of that. And there was this one morning, I was doing a video workout, and the physical trainer, said, in the context of really pushing yourself in exercise, she said, with great pain comes great wisdom. And I thought, that is so true. I have just experienced such great pain, but the wisdom that I came out with was this new appreciation of, I am glad to be alive. I am glad that I have all these friends that help. I describe it as kind of like Dorothy going from black and white Kansas into the color of Oz. And I thought, if that could change my perspective, I think that was the biggest boost to my own resilience that I got through that I ever had. If I could figure out how to get gifts and wisdom from grief, what if I could do that for anxiety and the difficulty of anxiety? And that's where the superpowers or gifts came from. It wouldn't have, this book would not be the same if I didn't go through that. So that is my most personal story about resilience and that relationship. But it's a relationship between learning from the tragedies and the difficulties. They don't all have to be tragedies. I've learned from difficulties, but I also learn from my successes, and that enjoyment that is sweeter because I know what failure is also builds into my resilience. So it's about using both ends of the teeter-totter to help your own resilience. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, at the point in the book where you start talking about the loss of your brother, one thing that dawned on me, again, because I'm a family resilience person, was how family processes are what promotes resilience, and it's the very same ones that you talk about in your book about resilience, individual resilience. Sorry, and those resilience factors relate to flow, the activist mindset. Focus, social connections, creativity, and the relationships being so important to building those. So, but why are things like compassion and creativity drawn from resilience? And then how in turn do they grow your resilience?
Yeah. So, one of my favorite chapters to write was the chapter on creativity. One of my dear friends is an expert on creativity, Julie Burstein, who wrote a wonderful book called Spark, How Creativity Works. And it is a compilation of some of the most creative minds in our world. She was the executive producer of the NPR show called Studio 360, where, if you know it, they interviewed all these amazingly creative people to ask their process. Well, she analyzed them for where their creativity came from. And so much of it, not all of it, but a lot of it came from their difficulties, their tragedies. The poet who became a poet because he was dyslexic and had to read 5 times slower than the rest of us because he couldn't read any faster. That gave him this appreciation of the rhythm of language that I would never appreciate because I'm trying to get through, as much, and I lose that rhythm, or the rest of us lose that rhythm. Family tragedies, so much creativity has come from that. So creativity and what we're pushed to do to get through it, not only can lead to some of the most creative examples of our time, but is a beautiful testament to how resilience is built. It is building something positive out of something negative, and something positive, including beautiful poems, sculptures, songs that touch so many people. So I love thinking about creativity that way, because people think it's a gift and it's a gift from God, and you work at it. Sometimes something blocks you and you find a creative way to get through, or sometimes something really bad happens and it changes your perspective, as it did in mine in writing this book. So it's a new way, and it brings creativity in your face, because we all have difficulties. We've all found solutions, and what we probably haven't done is be kind to ourselves and acknowledge that and say, you know what, that was a really good idea that I came up with. Talk to ourselves like our dog, as if our dog did that, to use your example. So I love that way of kind of humanizing, or bringing creativity down from a pedestal to, it's a way of thinking. It's a new way of thinking, and we all have the capacity to do that.
It's like, I've heard it said that, part of resilience are, being able to find positive meaning. And like, that's like the silver lining. And it's not to say that people are glad that whatever happened to them. They may still wish it was different, but they're able to say, it was hard and
Yes.
now I am, now my dad and I do different things after he came home with an injury from, the war or whatever. So it's learning how to almost appreciate and maybe even have gratitude for some of the gifts
Absolutely.
that can be brought to you.
Yeah, no, I think that is a powerful gift, to be able to really see and appreciate what has changed for the positive, and things changed for my relationship with the rest of my family. It wasn't terrible before, but we are so much closer now because of that. We would not have the same relationship we have today if that hadn't happened. So that is a beautiful thing that came out of it, and to be able to really articulate and name that is really powerful, and it literally makes me feel more resilient, that I could say, here are the things that have come from this that I appreciate now in my life.
One of the things I really, really appreciated about the way you wrote this book is that you have really kind of practical techniques and tools that you highlight to calm, flip, and channel anxiety. But you give the science behind it. So you really provide like the why, the rationale for why this technique may be useful. So it allows a reader like me to say, well, I'm not going to go, I'm not a journal, I'm not going to journal. I'm not that doesn't speak to me. But you give the rationale for why it might be helpful, so we can then adapt it and maybe come up with something that would be useful to us.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to share my favorite. This is the nerdy neuroscience favorite tool in the toolbox, and it is the tool of joy conditioning. And this is a tool that is that I came up with because of my 30 years of studying how memory works, how our long-term memories are formed, and it's actually a direct counter to fear conditioning that is fear-based. It's automatic. So, for example, when I lived in Washington, D.C., my apartment was burgled, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and I went around the corner, and I can still picture my door crowbarred open. It was hanging open, and it was clearly had been broken into. And that I have a fear conditioning memory of that. And every time, while I lived there, I turned the corner, I would have this fear that I would see this. That will never go away. It hasn't gone away in, 20 years. And those are automatic. We all have those kinds of things. How come we don't have the joy, conditioning that happens automatically? So that doesn't exactly happen automatically, but joy conditioning is the idea of culling your own personal memories for the most joyful, the most funny, the most happy memories in your life. And we know that while activation doesn't happen automatically, if you consciously go back and revivify those memories, relive them, those joyful emotions will come along with it. And so how often do we go back and think about the funniest party that we went to, or the best Christmas we ever had as a kid? And joy conditioning is the practice of doing that regularly, so that while it's hard to get rid of those fear conditioning negative memories, we can bring in more of the memories that we've already experienced in our lives. So that's my nerdy neuroscience tool to increase dopamine in your brain.
I want to thank both Dr. Suzuki and Dr. Mogul for this fascinating and stimulating discussion. And Dr. Suzuki, I have to tell you that before I popped back on screen, I did the box breathing, and it was very helpful. It really calmed anxiety. So thank you for that tip. You've given
Absolutely
so much wise advice and tools to comfort and decrease our anxiety. So thank you for the privilege and opportunity to learn from you how to harness our anxieties. We have a lot of questions.
Great.
Two questions. One question that's from Julie and from Robin about adolescents. How to help adolescents who struggle with anxiety, and they certainly have a lot on their plate right now. So
Yeah.
Have any counterintuitive tips, Julie asks, that might be helpful?
Well, I'll start, but maybe Catherine has some tips as well from her family practice. I mean, I wrote the book for adults, but I would say that the majority of the tools that I describe in the book can be easily incorporated with teenagers as well. Are there counterintuitive ones? Not necessarily counterintuitive, but what I tried to do was give such a wide array that anybody with any interest level can find a set of tools that they're at least willing to try, and all of them are appropriate for, you know, for adolescents. You know, of course, you might want to, you know, talk about it with your parent, but yeah, it is a very, very difficult time for adolescents. I don't know, Catherine, do you have any additional thoughts there?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely this. We know that we're having, you know, now sort of a mental health epidemic, right? You know, following our health pandemic. And right now we have an increase in adolescents with, you know, perhaps dangerous behavior, sadly, increase in hospitalizations for more severe things like attempts at suicide attempts and things like that. So, you know, it's really important, but that we give our adolescents and our youth these tools. But I'm thinking through all the strategies in the back of the book, and I can't think of one that wouldn't be appropriate for them. I mean, really, all of them, I feel like are super appropriate, and even for young kids could be adapted down, you know, for younger kids, like making a little, instead of the box breathing, make it, if there's, I don't know, SpongeBob probably isn't the most relevant anymore, but make it SpongeBob breathing, you know, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that it's so easy to do and really easy to practice as a family. And you do need to practice it. You don't want to suddenly be in this anxious situation and what did she say? You know, is it triangle breathing or box breathing? I can't remember. So make sure you got it. It's natural to you. And the other tool, oh, here's one that it's not counterintuitive, but I can't remember whether I talked about it. YouTube and meditation, YouTube and exercise. You have a free library of thousands of things you have access to, including very short meditations, very short breath work sessions, very short exercise sessions that will decrease your anxiety and depression levels. So, you know, you don't like doing whatever, jump rope, well, just go on YouTube and do a TikTok dance. TikTok also, YouTube and TikTok, that's what I would add in for adolescents to help get them engaged with some of the activities that I talk about in the book.
Dr. Suzuki, you talk about in the book also the power of asking for support and how that's a skill in and of itself. And as you talked about family communication, I was thinking about that as a strategy as well.
Absolutely, so important, and sometimes very fearful, a lot of anxiety around saying it out loud. And that's the thing. I mean, I wanted to to write this book as an invitation to the community to talk about it, because anxiety, there is a lot of shame around the emotion of anxiety. Do I have a mental illness? Am I mentally ill? Everybody has anxiety. That's why I included that stat that before the pandemic, 90% of people said they experience anxiety on a regular basis. That means everybody around, you're not alone. And so let's talk about it. Let's use these tools. Let's do them together, and let's take the stigma out of this, because everybody's suffering from anxiety. So very, very important message.
Thank you both. We have a question here from Jeff, and I think many of us can relate to this. How do I handle tremendous anxiety and fear about going to a doctor's visit thinking the worst? And I know when women go for their mammograms or other exams as we get older with skin issues, it is hard not to go there. So any advice on that?
Yeah. So, you know, I describe in the book emotional regulation techniques. And sometimes it's just useful to have this framework in mind. There are things that you can do before the event, before the appointment itself. Pick 3 tools that you can do before that appointment that will decrease your anxiety levels. Maybe it's the box breathing. Maybe it is taking a walk. Maybe it's playing with your dog. Maybe it's dancing in the living room where nobody is looking. But do something that you know is going to make you feel better. Make sure you do that right before. So that's your kind of prep before. During the actual appointment, you can, I say, structure that appointment so it is most comfortable for you. Maybe seeing the doctor face-to-face is scary. Maybe you do it video conference, so it's a little bit easier to, a little bit farther away. You can be in your home to get those to have that appointment if that's possible. But the point is, analyze the situation itself to see whether there are things that you can do that will make yourself more comfortable. And then afterwards, after the appointment, really, go back to Catherine's thought, really give yourself a pat on the back for getting through. Make sure you give yourself that resilience, those resilience pennies in your resilience piggy bank, because you got through something very, very difficult. And maybe that thing that you tried before, it didn't work at all. Okay, don't try that, but at least you tried it, So look at it, analyze it strategically like you are a coach for yourself. And so do it before, during, and after. And so you have lots of areas to deal with, and just thinking about it that way will help also get your mind off of the fear of, something you might find something wrong, which is understandable. We all go through that, but those are some of the emotional regulation techniques that I talk about in the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful advice. From Leo, first of all, Wendy, thank you for the insight. You made the distinction between everyday anxiety and debilitating anxiety.
Yeah.
Are these tools also applicable?
Yeah.
For the latter, for instance,
Yes.
in the case of OCD, can these tools help?
Absolutely. And the reason why I want to make a distinction is that this book should not be your go-to if you have debilitating anxiety, because I want to send you to somebody like Catherine, who is an expert, a professional at that. But that doesn't mean that all of these tools can't be used in conjunction with medical treatment for clinical levels of various forms of anxiety. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Catherine?
I think you answered it.
Okay.
Question from Janice, and I know you touched on it briefly. How do you tone down anxiety at bedtime when thoughts are flowing as you try to calm down?
Yeah. So, I am a personal expert on trying to work on my sleep. And one of the tools that I have found most helpful is make yourself really tired when you go to sleep. What is the best way to do that? Wake up really early. Wake up really early. Give yourself that morning of, it's easier for morning people like me. I happen to be a morning person, but there are other ways to make yourself tired. What is the time of the day that you can go out and work out, for example, that will make you tired? What makes you tired? Ask yourself that and try and do that, because there's nothing more satisfying than going to sleep when you're nice and tired. Those thoughts tend to disappear. There's they're really good books on how to prepare yourself for sleep. So not just make yourself tired, but absolutely screen time down, because all the blue light coming from, sorry if it's 9 o'clock for here, so you guys are okay, but I'm giving myself bad sleep tonight because it's 9 o'clock here. get that screen time down. Cool down your bedroom. Cool down your bedroom. That absolutely helps. My secret tool is I tend to use Audible, kind of like a bedtime story. So I don't listen to a story that I don't know, where I'm really trying to listen. I listen to a story that I'm really comfortable with, that I like the voice of the reader, and I use it like, like I was a kid and somebody was reading me a bedtime story. So you have something nice and comfortable and hopefully interesting to listen to lull you to sleep. So often this is like a personal exploration. That's what I did for myself. I really explored my own tools that really helped me get much better. And over the pandemic, my sleep really improved because I was really working on it. So I invite you to do that for yourself as well.
Thank you for sharing those personal tips. That's interesting that you slept better during the pandemic.
I did, yeah. Yeah.
Well, sadly, we are out of time because I think we could go on and on. This is such an important topic, but I want to thank you both, Wendy Suzuki, Catherine Mogul, for joining us for this very important program. Everybody should buy Dr. Suzuki's book, Good Anxiety. There's a plug for you, and it's just a really important read. So thank you both. I want to thank everybody that tuned in today for being part of our Open Mind community. And we look forward to seeing you on January 18th for our next Open Mind at 5 p.m. also Pacific time on the neuroscience of creativity, exploring mapping and tracking of ideas through images with world-renowned photographer and activist Catherine Opie, who's UCLA professor and chair of the UCLA Art Department now, and she'll be joined in conversation by Dr. Robert Bilder, who is the UCLA Tenenbaum Family Professor of Creative Research in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the Semel Institute. So thank you for this important discussion, for these wonderful tips. You've given us so much to unpack and take into our daily lives. Thank you both. And I wish everybody a good evening and stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you on January 18th. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Catherine.